Hail, Internet! It's Theron, it's Matt, the Dork Lords. We are here talking about a revisiting of An Unexpected Journey, The Hobbit, Part 1. I don't have a specific memory of seeing this like for the first time in the theater, but I do have a memory that's not theater related. Just before I break into that, do you have any memories particularly of seeing Unexpected Journey in the theaters?
Absolutely, yeah.
Awesome.
I was living in China at the time, and so I went to Hong Kong because it came out a few days early. So I was very proud to see it well before the American audience did. But no, I went there as soon as I could, which was like 9:30 in the morning to see Unexpected Journey. My wife and I was totally fired up. Although I went in with mediocre expectations. And I have to say, I loved it. I thought this movie was fantastic. And I remember immediately coming out, and I had to jump on Facebook and send you my initial thoughts. And I know I was like, "Oh, it's oh man, it's great! You're gonna love it." So, yeah. And then later on, of course, I wrote my detailed one. But it was a very good memory. And now, even to this day, even though I don't do it nowadays, but I do love going to see morning movies. Most people are like, "Oh, that's so awful," but this was. Watching Hobbit movies in Hong Kong established that precedent, so.
There we go. Yeah, no, this is a quality movie, and as we get through this trilogy, there'll be some moments where we discuss perhaps parts of Desolation of Smaug, parts of Battle of the Five Armies that aren't spectacular, but this one holds up. Definitely of the three Hobbit movies, this one is closest in texture and tone, I think, to the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
I agree. And I was really shocked at once the reviews started coming. I tried to avoid the reviews, but once they started coming out, I was reading them. I'm like, what? Because it didn't get great reviews. Then, ironically, when Desolation of Smaug came out, it got great reviews, and I'm like, what? Okay. Someone wrote, like, Peter Jackson's back to his form, which made Lord of the Rings great. I'm like, what? He's... No? I thought this movie was fantastic. I think the critics were a little hard on it. But yeah, I thought it was great. I can justify it.
So my memory of the movie, this is not from the theater, but this is before it came out. I was at Dragon Con. And there were some lesser known production folks, some of the creative types. It wasn't Peter Jackson hanging out. It was just some folks lower in the totem pole. Cool. But they gave like a little update on here's what we're working on, and here's how the film's progressing. And they took some questions from the audience. And I remember two things that they said are like, here's the two things that we're terrified about regarding this trilogy in general.
That they're terrified about it.
Correct.
Okay,
they were like, these are the things that we feel like we have to nail these two things perfectly in order for this, as it turned into a trilogy, as for The Hobbit to work. One of them was they felt like they would have to create the best dragon of all time in moviedom. Okay. Like if they gave like a good Smaug, it'd be like, oh, all right. Like they felt like it's a talking dragon, and we have to figure out how to make this the best dragon, in filmdom. Which I think arguably they did that.
Yeah,
now, obviously for this movie, we barely see him. We see his eye, we see his tail. But so there was that. Then the other thing, which is more relevant to this film, was they were thinking we have to figure out a way to create.
I think I know what you're gonna say.
13 distinctive personalities for these dwarves, but not and give them a little story arcs and spend some time with them, but not give so much time to each one that now you've lost the story because you're really into Glowin's backstory, whatever. So there was a challenge of we don't want to have them just be cookie cutters. We don't want to have 13 exactly identical dwarves that just walk around and follow everybody. We want to give these guys personalities, but we also and give them screen time without overshadowing the story we're telling.
Yeah.
And so that's it is really, when you think about it.
Not easy.
It's not easy. It's because those characters are there all the time. There's so you have to figure out how to do that. And I think they did a great job of it in this movie. I think in the movies to come, they maybe spent a little too much time on some backstories that I thought maybe were not so relevant. But in this movie, I thought they did a great job at showing us these dwarves.
I agree. Right, yeah. They did it in multiple ways. They did it some dwarves that like Bomber never had a line. But they did it in all kinds of ways. Some with lines, some with personality, some with costume.
As I watched this again, I did watch it again before we talked, and I'll be watching all the others as before we talk about them. One of the things I'll be watching for in this particular rewatching is maybe if they give some semblance of what we know is coming for the company that went to Moria, right? So we know Balin, obviously. There's a big Balin's tomb. Mm-hmm. But the other two dwarves here that both died in Moria are Ori, so the slingshot guy, and Owen, who's the guy with the hearing aid.
Yeah.
So those two eventually went with Balin to Moria and died. And in fact, Owen was killed by the Watcher in the water. So it's like,
oh, I didn't know
that.
Like
he suffered a very, very terrible death. And Owen, of course, is Glowin's brother. Glowin is Gimli's dad. So basically, when the Fellowship of the Ring is walking up to Moria through that little, through the lake where the Watch of Water is, Gimli is probably stepping very close to his uncle's bones. Like they must have been right in that vicinity,
in the water,
under the water. Like and Ori was he was keeping track of the journal. So probably the skeleton that's holding that book in Fellowship of the Ring is probably the bones of Ori. So anyway, just like
it must be. Yeah, I mean,
so it'd just be interesting if there's some kind of little clue, maybe Owen is scared of water or something like that. I'm kind of forgetting what his character is like, but do they give some little homage to what's to come, his destiny? Somewhere in these films. Anyway, one of my favorite parts of this movie is the dwarves at Bag End. I think it's really, really well done. It really captures the character of the book, and of course, it includes then that song.
I'm glad they did this song. I was wondering if they would do it. I'm so glad they did. And they did. It's a great
Far
version.
Over Misty Mountains. And then,
two songs actually.
That's awesome.
Crack the plates are bent.
Oh, right, yeah, good point. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates.
That's the cartoon.
I know, which we'll talk about that later. There's a couple of songs in here where I'm so used to the original, the animated versions, that I feel like these are almost like cover songs. I'm like, no, it's not as good as the. Anyway, we'll talk about it. But,
okay.
So the Far Over Misty Mountains, that song is so well done. I love the way that they sing it, in the hearth. And then they take that theme and they do the up-tempo version of it, the instrumental that kind of is symbolic of the dwarves.
It's basically
the theme.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I'll just say that theme is. I mean, if I take Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogies together, that theme is easily top 5 of my favorite themes.
Okay, what I was going to say is that it is the equivalent of dun 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 dun. It's basically that version for The Hobbit. It's that song for The Hobbit.
Yeah, I love it. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's great.
And you have those sweeping shots of them traveling while you have that music going.
And speaking of the original, the cartoon, that version of the cartoons is excellent as well. And I was like, man, how are they going to top that? Because that tune is so good, but they at least equaled it, if not better.
I mean, I guess we could jump to the things that I was going to save that for a musical section, but what the heck? Since we're talking about songs that we've heard before, so there's 2 moments in here. I think they're in more of the extended scenes, but where there's a song, and it's been done previously in an animated work, and I actually prefer the animated version.
Yeah.
So one of them is the great Goblin. He does his version of Down, Down to Goblin Town.
Definitely like the cartoon version.
Which, I mean, it's in the Hobbit, the animated Hobbit, the Rankin Bass with the Rankin Bass goblins. It looks so cool. Anyway, but that song, I've sung that song. Embarrassingly, I've sung it way too many times. With the down, down to Goblin Town, down, down to Goblin Town. You go, my lad. Don't pull my leg. They don't say that.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought the lines were when I was a kid. That's our running.
But I love it. Dun 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 dun. Anyway, I love that song. So when I heard the Goblin King doing his version of Down to Goblin Town, it just sounds wrong.
Yeah, it does.
it probably would have been reasonable if I hadn't heard the Rake and Bass version first, but
well, for me, his voice does not work for the Goblin King. I don't know. It's just me. That's probably my least favorite part, or least favorite casting decision, is his voice for that part.
And we'll talk about this as we go through here. We talked about in Lord of the Rings how Peter Jackson had to make choices, right? And some of them went against book type, but he had to make a lot of choices, and it turned out a lot of his choices paid off. And a lot of the choices he makes in this movie pay off as well. But you start to see some choices that I think are not as effective in the Hobbit trilogy.
Oh, sure.
I think his batting average on choices is lower in the Hobbit than it was for Lord of the Rings.
For sure.
And here's one of those where I'm like, where the Goblin King is like, I think the idea was, oh look, he's getting information from the outside. He has spies, and so he's probably like a spy master guy, and he's really smart. But it kind of just, it didn't really play the type. Like it felt odd.
I think they had to do that just because of the whole Azog part. That addition, I know Azog's a real character, but that addition of having him chase Thorin down the whole time is, it's a good counterpart to like the hero Thorin. Like the villain, Azog,
right?
Even though later on, as we know, it starts switching who the real bad guy is.
Yeah, that's where it runs into problems. And
later.
actually, we'll cover that later. Yeah, I do have a whole thing on Azog, and I think it would be good to just show what happened in the books, just so that going forward, we're like, here's what Peter Jackson decided to change. We'll get to that. But the other song that I really like the first version of it, and so even though this version is peppy and reasonable, I can't not hear the first version. It's when Boffer starts singing there is an inn a merry old inn
under
an old gray hill. Right. It's from the extended version. Yeah. They're in Rivendell. He jumps up on the table, starts singing a song. It's a perfectly fine rendition of that song, but what I hear is from the Lord of the Rings animated. Frodo sings this song in 3, and so he does there is an inn, a merry old inn, beneath an old grey hill, and there they brew the beer so brown. So that's what I'm hearing, and like when he's not singing that, it sounds grating somehow to me, but anyway, I don't know.
I agree.
Nerd, yay for doing the songs, and I think the most effective of the songs they did was the dwarves singing the Misty Mountain song. It's really, really well done. Great scenes, memorable scenes. The flashbacks,
fantastic.
They're just great.
Fantastic.
I love them. The flashback of Smaug originally attacking.
Yeah, that's great.
And then the flashback to the battle between the dwarves and orcs at Moria.
That scene coming on, my jaw dropped. I was like, oh my, they're going to show this. Huh? And it's so well done. I thought it's brilliant flashback. It might be one of my favorite flashbacks of all time.
Which is another choice.
Yeah,
we got to give him credit. Peter Jackson, a great choice, because that's not in the book. That's not the way the book starts or anything like that.
Oh, right.
So he does this really, really cool flashback that brings you in. He's also then got this fairly long period with Elijah Wood. So Frodo is there, and he's kind of basically saying, "See, these two movies are connected." We see the older Bilbo, Ian Holm, and then it comes back to Martin Freeman, which is cool. I mean, you could argue that maybe they spent a little too long on there since it's not really that relevant, but I appreciated the fact that they were connecting these two franchises, essentially.
And similar to what you said about Fellowship of the Ring, like how long it was before you get the Fellowship even moving, or at least the Hobbits moving. This is similar. Right. This is a good exposition, but it doesn't feel laboring or anything like that. It's for me, the whole thing was very enjoyable.
Yeah, and again, casting is much like with Lord of the Rings. I mean, Martin Freeman as Bilbo just knocks it out of the park. He's just amazing, really, really good. I love his facial expressions. He does so much with his face. Mm-hmm. They don't even need to have the text for it. That's really, really great. That's another problem that we're going to have with some of the future movies that I had anyway, is we start to see less and less Bilbo. And I feel like the movie called The Hobbit should have The Hobbit in it. This movie keeps focus on Bilbo, and so to its credit, it keeps us experiencing things through the eyes of Bilbo, which is great. But in my opinion, the best scene in this movie is the Riddles in the Dark scene. It's brilliant. It's straight off the page practically. Mm-hmm. It's Andy Serkis, Martin Freeman. I could watch that for days. Mm-hmm. It's really, really, really good.
It's fantastic. I think I really like the part where Bilbo puts on the ring and then is trying to escape, and then he has his moment where he's about to try to hit Bilbo or to kill Bilbo, but then he has his what is it, his mercy or his what is it, Gandalf?
Right, they have Gandalf has the line in this one that they kind of threw out the mercy, but they did the true courage is knowing not how to take a life, but when to spare it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, Gandalf's almost giving him his little this is going to come in handy later.
Yeah. And of course he's talking to Frodo about that in Moria when they're taking their break. But that's a beautiful scene too. I think Gollum's face is great, where he looks like you could see the sadness and then the anger as Bilbo jumps over him. That's all very well done.
Yeah, the sadness turns to anger. Also, we see more of that duality of, right? Sméagol and Gollum are still having their fights even back, years and years earlier. So there's a bit where they're talking like, shut up. It's like, what, me? It's like, I'm not talking to you. But like, just those little, the duality of Gollum as we know him to be later is really, really cool. So that scene, fantastic.
Yeah. I love the Goblin action scenes too. I think those are very well done. It's interesting. I can't remember what some of the criticisms were of that, but I thought it was great. To me, it doesn't feel very choreographed, and of course, this is going to be one of my big complaints about the later movies. Some of the action scenes feel so choreographed that they're just unrealistic and just kind of silly. But that scenes, I love the underground setting with all the wooden structures and platforms built and the bridges on the ropes that are swinging and stuff. That's all very well done. Going back a bit, I think one of my only real criticisms that I gave to you when I first saw the movie was like, I thought Erebor felt a little bit too grand, like it was so big and so expensive. You see those digital shots where you look down and it's just like, it looks like it's a mile deep, and I'm like, it feels just a little too big for me. But I mean, this is a small criticism, the way I have small criticisms for the Lord of the Rings. That was one. But then later on, jumping back to where we were just talking about, the scene after they escape and they're trying to regroup right before out of the frying pan into the fire.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful scene too, especially the interplay between Thorin and Bilbo when Bilbo's listening and then he reveals himself, and Gandalf trying to cover up because he realized he found some kind of ring.
Right.
And then I started to feel a little bit nervous when Azog showed up. I was like, uh-oh, this thing might go badly, but I don't think it did. I thought it was great. And I love the escape sequence with the eagles. I thought they nailed that beautifully too.
Yeah, no, the visuals there were really cool with the tree hanging out over the edge, and then they're all like, oh, and then,
And they, out of the book, throwing the fiery pine cones down. That was great.
It's funny you mentioned the grand hall and how big it is. It reminds me of something my wife Jackie brought up at the time. We were talking about how if you're a dwarf, if you go mining in a mountain, you bring a dragon, you bring a Balrog, something's gonna come along and try to take your stuff and kill you. So her point was, well, maybe don't build these halls that are big enough for a dragon to fit in. Like you're right. Dwarves. You probably need a 5-6 foot clearance. You build little halls.
Really imagine like an invading force of elves. They'd have a really tough time with that.
You think about this, like Smaug, when Smaug is just flying around looking for them in the mountain. You're like, all right. If it's just like a series, like a honeycomb, you're like, all right, done.
Good point.
What next? But yeah, the flight from Goblin Town is bonkers. I mean, it's just like the action is just all over the place. It is fun to watch. It feels a little like a video game. I feel like
a little bit, a hair, but it works great for me. I can see people saying that a little bit like video, sure, but it's.
I guess there's also that sense of
the music's great during it. There's a lot of action. It's just go.
I was trying to think of what it is about it that's different, say, from Lord of the Rings. Though it's the feel that's different. I think
it's definitely
the feel
more
that's
grand.
different for me is
it's
it's grand, but it's also I'm not sure that I ever thought they were gonna die. Or I mean, I'm not saying that I get that feeling in Lord of the Rings, but there's some times where you feel the danger a little more, maybe in Lord of the Rings, whereas here you're like, they're going to get through.
Well, yeah, like look at in Moria when the goblins go and attack them. That's very small scale sort of fight. There's a single troll. It's in a small area, but it feels a lot more terrifying than the Goblin escape scene. Goblin's escape scene's a lot bigger, a lot more going on, a lot more physics problems with the swinging bridges and everything and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I love the way that they use the ladder, they use the boulder, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But
it's more of a fun sort of escape as opposed to like a fearful sort of thing. Yeah,
which is maybe the difference in some ways between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings book-wise. There's a fairy tale versus maybe a more adult style storyline. So maybe it's paying homage to that a bit.
Yeah.
Rivendell obviously looks beautiful as it did in Lord of the Rings. I love the. It looks awesome. It's just I'm thinking like, man, how many rooms does this guy have? But when Elrond's like, these are moon letters. They're only seen in moonlight. Let's go to my moon rune reading terrace. Yeah, right. So it's like, it looks gorgeous, but I'm like, you had a specific place so you could read runes from the moon? Like, damn. All right,
waterfalls coming
anyway.
through.
No, it looked great.
It looks great. Yeah, very classic.
I like that scene too. In that, Thorin is reluctant to obviously give the map over to Elrond. Gandalf's like, look, just the one people that can actually read the map in this world.
Spare me.
And so Thorin decides, like, all right, relents, and it's Balin who's like, Thorin, no.
I love the way he says that.
Like it just kind of comes out of nowhere a little bit. Like, oh, I didn't realize Balin was so protective of this too. It's kind of interesting. That moment was revealing about Balin's, feelings about elves and stuff.
I
thought that was really
Balin's
cool.
Probably my favorite of the dwarves, I guess.
Yeah, and you see. I think Peter Jackson treats him like the guy who would lead an expedition back to Moria. Like you see that he, as much as he's not the leader, he's kind of the unofficial patriarch of this group of 13, I think. Yeah. He has a lot of respect. A lot of people,
Each of them, like you were saying, like each of them has their own unique personality and things to like and enjoy. That you can easily identify them with. But Nori's like the gemsmith. He's the one who's like trying to like find the keyhole in the next movie. It's
right. Boffer, big personality.
He has very friendly to Bilbo. Right.
Has a lot of funny lines. When he's describing Smaug that makes Bilbo faint, I thought that bit is pretty funny to me.
Yeah.
Like, oh yes.
The more enjoyment
Think furnace
of the
with wings.
Right. I like the scene in Rivendell when they're sitting there. They're like got a fire going. Like looks like they've broken like a table. Thanks, the legs of a table to burn, and he's cooking like a sausage over there. Bombor. He throws Bombor.
Right. He weighs it out like, I think one more ounce
will cause the table to break. The table breaks, and look at the reactions of all the dwarves. I think it's Feely who's got this hilarious like look on his face. So that stuff's all really well done.
So one of the extended scenes, I think it was. Commenter Aedrid mentioned like, you guys are going to talk about the dwarven skinny dipping scene.
Oh yeah, I could do without that one, but I'm sure it appeals to some folks. But whatever. I think they covered it well in the funny scene with Bombur.
Yeah, but the point of that scene is to show like uncouth dwarves and very cultured elves. But they have a lot of those scenes in there in the just a regular version of the thing. Yeah. I do like Ori. Like, I don't like green food. It was a funny bit. But yeah, you basically have a lot of scenes of the elves looking uncomfortable while the dwarves, cause mischief in Rivendell. One scene from Rivendell that is, I think is pretty cool. I get why they cut it because it doesn't necessarily lead anywhere, but it's kind of a haunting bit. Is Bilbo coming upon the shards of Narsil and seeing the painting of Sauron at the moment when they had the ring cut from him. And so Bilbo doesn't have the ring yet. He's seeing the ring and the story of the ring, and you just get this idea of like, God, his whole life story is about to become
that.
Part of this story. This story is going to be, he could be in it. You could paint Bilbo in this picture because he is such a huge part of this ring. I thought that was really, really cool.
Isn't there also an extended scene where Bilbo overhears Gandalf and Elrond talking about Thorin? I think that was a great extended scene too that I thought would have worked wonderfully in the theatrical.
Yeah, so Elrond and Gandalf are talking first about Gandalf's plan about Smaug. That there is a plan. I'm trying to basically attack on two fronts. they don't talk about Sauron in this thing, but in book terms, he's trying to attack Sauron and Smaug at the same time so that he can keep them away from each other. And then you hear Elrond say, yeah, by the way, can we trust Thorin? He's got this lineage, and Thorin's overhearing this, and it's like, and so is Bilbo.
Oh, okay.
What's interesting there is, and we'll talk a little bit about the book differences and stuff, but again, it is a choice. And the choice that's being made here, I think, is to put Thorin into kind of an Aragorn model. In some ways, if you think about the war between the dwarves and orcs
at Moria,
if you think of the battle at Moria, it's very similar in a lot of ways to this War of the Last Alliance, right? You've got the big baddie, you've driven back to his stronghold. There's a big fight. The big baddie comes out, kills some of the leaders, and then there's the upstart cuts off his hand / finger and doesn't kill the enemy, but
Thorin thinks he's dead.
In that moment wins. Yeah. And so there's this sense, and then I think the idea that they're trying to say is that the Arkenstone has its own allure to it that kind of drives dwarves, mad. And so can Thorin overcome, say, the weakness of his lineage, kind of much like, can Aragorn do what Isildur couldn't? I think there's a little bit of that. I think they're trying to show that.
Lots of parallels. Yeah, great point.
Yeah. Which aren't necessarily in the book, because we'll talk about that with Azog, for instance. But it's an interesting. I appreciate that they're trying to put a big story arc for Thorin in this, since he is such a huge part of the story. Another cool scene, extended scene, again, it's not necessary, but it's a fun little bit, is in the past we have Gandalf doing the fireworks for the Shire, and there's little kid Bilbo swinging a little wooden sword at Gandalf. It's like, Bilbo, come away! That's kind of fun. It's like, oh, okay, so he has maybe a memory of seeing Gandalf and his fireworks when he was a little kid.
Cool.
There's another scene where Gandalf and Saruman are talking, and they're talking about the whereabouts of Thrain's ring. So Thrain has one of the 7 dwarven rings. And I can see why they cut this. You start pulling some story threads here, and you don't know where you're going to get. I mean, the timeline's a bit off. I guess we'll talk about this. What the heck? Let's do it. All right. So, in the movie and in the book, Gandalf gives the key and the map to Thorin, right? And he's like, hey, your father wanted me to give you these. Fine. Now, in the book, the way Gandalf gets that key and that map is he goes to Dol Guldur, and this is like 100 years before the events of The Hobbit. He's hanging out at Dol Guldur. He's trying to figure out whether Sauron's around. Basically, he's doing some spying. While he's there, he finds a prisoner. It's Thrain. He doesn't know it's Thrain. Thrain can't remember his name. But Thrain's like, give this key and this map to my son. Doesn't name his son. And so Gandalf's like, okay. And then the guy dies. So it's this dying guy's wish. Gandalf keeps the key and the map, has no idea who it should go to except a dwarf. Many years later, he has a meeting with Thorin. He starts realizing this is the guy. Oh, okay, wait, I've got a thing for you. And so he gives him the key and the map. Great. But that's also at that point, Gandalf would know, oh yeah, Thrain doesn't have the ring anymore because he's a prisoner of Sauron. Sauron took the ring. It would be no question as to where the ring is. The ring's gone because I got to see. So what I'm wondering is, since we know that in the Desolation of Smaug yet to come, we're going to see a version of Gandalf meeting Thrain, but it's much later. When did Thrain give Gandalf the key and the map in the movie?
No.
Like, why would he? In terms of the only reason that the map and the key are given to Gandalf is because he's dying in a prison.
Right.
If he's not dying in a prison, which he's apparently not in the movie, why is he like, hey, Gandalf, give this to my son when you see him? Like, I'm wondering in what context they would have actually met that Thrain would have been, like, comfortable with giving this up to Gandalf. I'm sure there's a way you could explain it, but it gets a little timey-wimey, as they say in Doctor Who, like trying to figure that stuff out a little bit. But anyway, How about music? We already talked about how much I love the Far Over Misty Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
When Thorin attacks Azog.
Oh, good one. I was going to mention that.
That's the Nazgul theme, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And I was like, why? When I was sitting in the theater going, okay, why are they using this music? I don't get it. I don't get it. But you're right. Yeah, it's the dun 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 music. I don't know.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was like,
strange
what is
choice.
it trying to foreshadow? Or
yeah, I don't. It doesn't.
Anyway.
I can't rationalize it. Yeah, that's strange.
If you've got an idea out there, commenters, as to why the Nazgul theme was used for the fight between Thorin and Azog, let us know. Okay.
Of course, one of the big important evil themes. I don't know if it's Dol Guldur or the concept of the necromancer, but it's the bum 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 dun 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 dun. Very simple, but you hear that all over the place. And I'm sure that's another half-step motif. For sure it is.
Oh yeah.
But I did hear Sauron's music, but at an interesting time. It's during that scene with Galadriel, Saruman, Gandalf, and Elrond. It's very soft. I think it's towards the end now. I'm drawing a blank. I should have taken notes on this, but you hear, I think it's like on an oboe or maybe bassoon. I can't remember. But you hear that in the background. So, and it wasn't. They were not referencing Sauron directly. It might have been discussion. We have to go back and listen. But if you will hear that music, then I was listening for it when they were mentioning the necromancer, but you don't get it. You just get the Dol Guldur, bam, 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 and that's all over the Hobbit movie. For sure, you will hear the ring theme when. In fact, I can remember it now. You'll hear that when he picks up the ring when you find it. And I'd be shocked if you don't hear Gollum's music.
We talked about some of the differences, book to movie. Obviously, there's a ton of differences. We're not going to talk about them all. But a couple of them that really work. One is the inclusion of Radagast. I like Radagast in here.
Me too.
He is mentioned in the book. Like Gandalf mentions him by name.
Yeah.
He does not appear in the book. But why not bring him in?
Yeah.
Roscabel, where he lives, is right next to Dol Guldur. It makes sense from the Roscabel rabbits. He has the great line of "Spawn of Ungoliant, or I am no wizard." Like, oh yeah.
Yeah, I like the way he says that.
I'd love to give that line. I think that's the line I would give in this movie if I could.
I also like the way he delivers that when Gandalf says, Dol Guldur, but the old fortress is abandoned. No, Gandalf, 'tis not. Bum, 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 bum.
Yeah. I mean, they play him for laughs in some ways,
got some
but
great lines.
but he's also he's still. I like the fact that he's competent as well as being somewhat comical.
Yeah, he does. The actor does a good job of that. I can't remember his name.
Sylvester McCoy, I think is his name.
Mm-hmm.
Another cool thing that is, it's not from The Hobbit, but it certainly is in the like appendices and those type of materials, is the White Council. So when Saruman, Gandalf, Galadriel, Elrond are meeting, the White Council are meeting. We don't know necessarily where they met. I think Rivendell is a reasonable guess as that they might have met. We know that they probably did meet around that time because they were planning an attack on Dol Guldur. So they certainly would have, organized. So in terms of like paying attention to canon, the White Council meeting works in that way.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I think it's really cool. And it's fun to see the mistrust between Saruman and Gandalf already. Mm-hmm. Which that is mirrored in what we know about the White Council from the books. I've done a video on the White Council. If you want to check that out, feel free. They had like a series of meetings, and we know a little bit about each one. So this is one of them. One of the things that I'm still not sure why this choice was made. So we talk about the choices. This is one of the choices I think is less effective. And it's made during this White Council scene, which is effective. But it's the idea that the ring wraiths are buried. So he's like, they buried them in the high fells and never to see the light of day. But they broke out. How did they break out from the inside? And none of that is from the books at all. They were not buried or imprisoned. It never happened. And I'm not sure what you gain from saying they were buried, except, I'm theorizing here. So my guesses would be, one, maybe Peter Jackson wanted to lean into the idea of Sauron being a necromancer. They keep calling him that So like, oh look, he brought them back from the dead. Maybe I don't know that you need to do that.
Yeah,
but
I doubt 95% of the audience really knows what a difference in a necromancer and a wizard and a sorcerer are. So
yeah,
very nerdy sort of thing.
So that doesn't sound that compelling.
Yeah.
Maybe he's paying homage to the Barrow Wights because he didn't do the Barrow Mounds back in Lord of the Rings, but that's like the Witch King haunted the graves of his enemies with these spirits. Again, I don't know that that's really something that's necessary. So I think the main reason to do it is to give Gandalf a reason to leave the group. Maybe like give Gandalf something to do, because we know he keeps like leaving the group and then coming back and leaving and coming back. Maybe they're trying to give him like a compelling thing to do when he disappears.
Right.
But otherwise, I just don't know. I mean, because it's a pretty big break from canon, and I'm just not sure what you get out of it by that, just saying that they're. But so anyway, again, if you out there in the comment land have an idea for what Peter Jackson was going for, obviously he made this choice, and it wasn't just an accident. Like he stuck with this notion. What is he gaining out of making the ring wraiths, imprisoned and then breaking out? Let's talk about Azog, because I do feel like, as much as I like Azog, some people didn't like the fact that he was a CGI versus other stuff. I'm cool with it. I didn't have a problem with him.
I'd
being
rather
a
have it
CGI
be
character.
old school for me, being dressed up in something. But I mean, if they make that choice, I can live with it. It's not, I mean, like you said, it works well for me. In this movie, especially.
So, right, in this movie, I think everything works out just fine. I think when they run into problems is when they introduce Bolg later.
Yep.
And so the reason being, or part of the reason being, Azog has died in the books. And I'll read you a little bit where he dies. But Azog dies, and it's his son, Bolg,
And that Bolg.
who is the one, man, that Bolg, watch out. He don't play. Bolg, is in the Battle of the Five Armies, and so it's just interesting if you go with the notion of, hey, Azog is this, the pale orc. He's really cool, and we don't know a lot about Bolg. Let's just have Azog be our villain. Fine, but then to bring in Bolg as well, and you're like, wait, okay, well, if you were going to bring in Bolg anyway, then why not just stick with the storyline and say it's Bolg? Right. Anyway, so it gets a little confusing that way. In the books, it's Thror, so that's Thorin's granddad. After they've been kicked out of Erebor, Thror decides to go and just check out Moria. He has a sidekick, Nar. And they kind of sneak into Moria to try to see what's what. Well, Thror gets captured.
Yes.
He gets killed by Azog, and it's a bad scene. As a result, Thrain, so Thror's son, Thorin's dad, basically calls vengeance on orcs and Azog in particular, and they start the war of the dwarves and orcs. It's not just one battle. It's 6 years. Oh. They start up in Gundabad and they chase the orcs. They just basically trying to do genocide on the orcs. And they drive them south into this final battle at Moria. And so the other thing that's very different is Thorin doesn't fight Azog in the books. It's Nain, who is a cousin of Thrain, is killed by Azog. And so Nain's son, Dane, that's the guy that we see in Battle of Five Armies, who shows up. Dane is the one who kills Azog, kind of out of vengeance for Azog killing his dad. And so it's the part of Dane is replaced by Thorin in Peter Jackson's version. And so anyway, it just creates a lot of different ripples that are different. Again, in this movie, it works. I feel like over time when you start adding in Dane and you add in Bolg, you've taken the story that you replaced and now you're bringing it back. And you're like, oh crap! Wait, which story is the one you're using? So here, just to give you a little, because I think this, the Azog Bolg thing is such a huge part of the trilogy. Let me just read you a little bit. Bear with me here. I'm going to read you a little bit of the passages of Azog's appearance.
Let's do it, baby.
Okay, so Thror has shown up with his buddy Nar. Thror has gone in, disappeared. Nar's waiting for him at the gate. Then Nar came up and found that it was indeed the body of Thror, but the head was severed and lay face downwards. As he knelt there, he heard orc laughter in the shadows, and the voice said, "If beggars will not wait at the door but sneak in to try thieving, that is what we do to them. If any of your people poke their foul beards in here again, they will fare the same. Go and tell them so. But if his family wish to know who is now king here, the name is written on his face. I wrote it. I killed him. I am the master." Then Nar turned the head and saw branded on the brow in dwarf runes, so that he could read it, the name Azog. So Azog wrote his name on his face. That name was branded in his heart, and in the hearts of all the dwarves afterwards. Nar stooped to take the head, but the voice of Azog said, "Drop it! Be off! Here's your fee, beggar beard." A small bag struck him. It held a few coins of little worth. So he sends him back to tell him, like, "I killed your king. Here's some coins to pay you off." Thrain gets that news. Thrain spends 7 days in agony, basically, in mental anguish, and then just finally decides this can't be withstood. We're doing this, and they go to war. Huge war. 6 years go on. Now cut to, you're in the middle of this final battle, Azanulbizar, and Azog is about to kill Nain. So that's Dane's father, cousin of Thrain. Then Azog, with a swift swing, hewed his neck. His mail collar withstood the edge, but so heavy was the blow that Nain's neck was broken, and he fell. Then Azog laughed, and he lifted up his head and let forth a great yell of triumph. But the cry died in his throat, for he saw that all his host in the valley was in a rout, and the dwarves went this way and that, slaying as they would, and those that could escape from them were flying south, shrieking as they ran. He turned and fled back towards the gate. So that's what we see him doing in the movie, like, I'm getting out of here. But up the steps after him leaped a dwarf with a red axe. It was Dane Ironfoot, Nain's son.
Oh, yeah.
Right before the doors, he caught Azog, and there he slew him and hewed off his head. All right, so Dane's just decapitated Azog in revenge for the killing of his dad. When at last the battle was won, the dwarves that were left gathered in Azanulbizar. They took the head of Azog and thrust into its mouth the purse of small money that they had set it on him with a stake. So that money that he threw out, they gave it back to him in his decapitated head. But no feast nor song were there that night, for their dead were beyond the count of grief, which is mentioned in the movie. Yep. Barely half of their number, it is said, could still stand or had hope of healing. One last little bit here. So, they've won. In the movie, it's kind of just said, like, we suffered so many losses, we just bailed, essentially. We're like, we're out of here. And Azog had fled into the mountain, and so the orcs, I guess, still had Moria in the movie. Well, the orcs don't have Moria in the books because they just got beat pretty bad. But so then Thrain turned to Dane and said, "Surely my own kin will not desert me." People are leaving. "No," said Dane. "You are the father of our folk, and we have bled for you and will again. But we will not enter Khazad-dûm. You will not enter Khazad-dûm.
No.
Only I have looked through the shadow of the gate. Beyond the shadow, it waits for you still, Durin's bane. The world must change, and some other power than ours must come before Durin's folk walk again in Moria."
Oh,
so
wow.
that's a really cool plot development, right? So Dane goes up to the gate, cuts off Azog's head. In so doing, he's right there. And something he sees tells him the Balrog is still there. Like, maybe they were hoping the Balrog had left or was gone, but he's not. And so it's Dane that's like, "No, you can't go in there. We'll all just get killed off by the Balrog, so we should just leave."
We can't help ourselves to mind.
Yeah, we gotta keep Mithril, damn it! And the huge halls that the Balrog can walk around in. But so anyway, that storyline is really cool. And I kind of almost, I wish somehow they'd have found a way to include that in the movie. I don't know. Obviously, it's a huge plot point, and you get lost and stuff. But since you do and show Dane later, it's kind of interesting. It would be cool to show him as a part of this plot. But anyway,
flashback to before Unexpected Journey was coming out. You and I were hypothesizing about that very scene. And we didn't know we were going to have 3 movies either. We thought we were going to have 2. And back then, we thought it might be they were talking about doing a connecting movie. So, like, one movie would be The Hobbit. The second would be something original that would take all the Lord of the Rings lore and connect the 2 together. And I was very excited about that. Oh,
man, I would have just jumped out of my seat for that. Yeah, you're right. At the time, it was like, okay, so they're going to do.
So I remember
The Hobbit as a movie
multiple times, like, oh man, will they have Balin going back in trying to? Oh my god! And seeing the Balin,
right? Like to show what happened to, like, between The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. Right, Balin goes back to Moria. We could have Aragorn hunting down Gollum.
I was saying, returning him. Aragorn and Gandalf hunting for Gollum. That's going to be fantastic.
And turning him into Thranduil. So since we meet Thranduil, we could see Thranduil, Gollum, and a young Aragorn turning him in. Like, that whole bit would be really, really cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot you could have shown that I was like, oh, even if it's just a montage.
Yeah.
But yeah, we didn't get that. But anyway, and that could have been right. That could have been maybe something to show some connective tissue. But point being, again, I just read out a whole bunch of stuff that's not in the movie, but that's just to say that Azog, the choice to make Azog alive and be somehow wanting to take out the line of Durin, that's Peter Jackson making a choice. For this movie, I think it's a good choice. Mm-hmm. For the trilogy, I'm not so sure. But, Azog is a fearsome villain, a good foe on that note. And so, he works as the big bad in this thing, so good on that.
So where do you rank this movie in the pantheon of all the Tolkien movies?
I'm gonna put it. I think I'm gonna put it 4th. So out of our 6 movies, I think I do the Lord of the Rings movies. I think are all at least somewhat better than this one. Although I do feel like it's closer in quality to the Lord of the Rings movies than it is perhaps to what's coming in Desolation of Smaug and Battle of Five Armies. Not to say those are bad movies. There are certainly things to really like about those 2 movies. Yep. But I feel like this movie is a tad. So Two Towers was my number 3. This doesn't really come up to Two Towers, frankly, but it's in the ballpark. It's in the conversation, hanging in at number 4 in my mind.
Yeah, same here. I'll put it at number 4, but I think it's up there with Return of the King, my number 3. You don't have the sentimental stuff that's ending Return of the King, so I try not to count that as a factor. But in terms of like pacing and movie making and stuff like that, I think it holds its own easily with Return of the King. I loved it. I thought it was great.
Gotcha. No, and yeah, it's memorable. It's very watchable, and they took that challenge of making the 13 dwarves unique and distinct, and they pulled it off. And Martin Freeman can do no wrong as Bilbo. There's a lot to like about this movie. We will be back talking about The Desolation of Smaug. Thank you so much, Theron. I appreciate it, sir.
Oh yeah, pleasure.
And have a good one, everybody. Bye.